What happens when two broken hearts get trapped together in a tiny cabin, while a snowstorm rages for 7 long days? The winter of 1873 came early to the Wyoming territory, and it came without mercy. Eleanor Mae Sullivan had been traveling westward for nearly 3 weeks when the first snowflakes began to fall from a sky that looked like spilled ink across gray canvas. She was 24 years old, alone, and running from a life that had offered her nothing but broken promises and shattered dreams. Her husband had died 6 months ago, leaving behind nothing but debts and the memory of a man who had never truly loved her. The creditors had taken everything: the house, the furniture, the small pieces of jewelry her mother had left her. So Eleanor had done what countless others before her had done. She had packed what little remained and headed west, chasing whispers of opportunity in a land that promised second chances to those brave enough to seek them. But bravery meant nothing when the temperature dropped below freezing and your horse collapsed beneath you. Exhausted and unable to take another step, Eleanor stood in the middle of a narrow mountain pass, her thin wool coat pulled tight around her trembling body, watching her mare's labored breathing create small clouds in the frigid air. The snow was falling harder now, thick white curtains that obscured everything more than a few feet ahead. She knew, with terrible certainty, that she would die here. There was no town nearby, no fellow travelers, nothing but endless white wilderness and the howling wind that seemed to carry voices from another world. She had always imagined death would feel peaceful, but there was nothing peaceful about the cold that seeped into her bones, about the way her fingers had stopped hurting and started going numb, about the tears that froze on her cheeks before they could fall. That was when she saw the light. It was faint at first, just a warm golden flicker in the distance. Barely visible through the swirling snow, Eleanor blinked, certain her dying mind was playing tricks on her. But the light remained steady and real, a beacon in the frozen darkness. She left her horse there, knowing she could not save it, and barely able to save herself. Each step through the deepening snow required every ounce of strength she had left. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else, heavy and uncooperative. The light grew brighter as she approached, and soon she could make out the shape of a cabin. Smoke rising from its chimney like a prayer answered. Eleanor fell against the door rather than knocked on it. Her frozen hands could not form a fist, so she simply collapsed there, her body sliding down the rough wooden surface as consciousness began to slip away. The door opened suddenly, and she tumbled forward into warmth and light, and the arms of a stranger. His name was Caleb Stone, and he had lived alone in these mountains for 7 years. Eleanor learned this later, after she woke beneath thick fur blankets, in a bed that smelled like pine and wood, and something indefinably masculine. The cabin was small but well built, with a fire crackling in a stone hearth, and shelves lined with books that seemed almost out of place in such a rugged setting. Animal pelts hung on the walls, evidence of his trade as a trapper and hunter. And then there was the man himself. Caleb was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell past his collar, and a beard that could not hide the strong lines of his jaw. His eyes were the color of winter storms, gray and deep, and holding secrets that Eleanor found herself wanting to understand. He moved through the small space with a quiet grace that seemed at odds with his imposing size, and when he spoke, his voice was low and careful, as if words were precious things not to be wasted. He told her she had been unconscious for nearly a full day. He told her the storm outside had grown into something fierce, a blizzard that would likely last another week, at least. He told her she was welcome to stay until the passes cleared, that he had supplies enough for 2, that she was safe here. But when their eyes met, something passed between them that had nothing to do with safety. Caleb kept his distance those first few days. He slept on a bedroll near the fire while Eleanor recovered in his bed, and he was always careful to look away when she caught him watching her. But the cabin was small, and proximity bred familiarity whether they sought it or not. Eleanor learned that he had come west from Boston, that he had been a professor of literature, before tragedy had driven him into self-imposed exile. He did not speak of what that tragedy was, and she did not press, recognizing in his silence the same kind of pain she carried in her own heart. She learned that he read Shakespeare by firelight, and that his hands, rough and calloused from years of survival, could be impossibly gentle when he changed the bandages on her frostbitten fingers. She learned that when he smiled, which was rare, it transformed his weathered face into something almost beautiful. On the fourth night, Eleanor could not sleep. The wind outside had died to a whisper, and the cabin was filled with a stillness that felt almost sacred. She lay in the darkness, listening to Caleb's breathing from across the room, and found herself wondering what it would feel like to close the distance between them. She rose quietly, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor, and moved to stand before the dying fire. The coals cast a warm glow across her nightgown, and she hugged her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how alone she had been for so very long. She did not hear him approach, but she felt him, the warmth of his body behind her, the weight of his presence filling the space she had not even known was empty. "Eleanor," he said, and her name in his mouth sounded like something holy. She turned to face him and found him closer than she had expected, close enough that she could see the firelight reflected in his gray eyes, close enough that she could count the silver strands in his dark hair. "You should go back to sleep," he said. But he did not move away. "I cannot sleep," she whispered. "Every time I close my eyes, I think about how close I came to dying. And then I think about how I have spent my whole life not really living at all." Caleb's jaw tightened, and she watched him wage some internal battle that played out in the tension of his shoulders and the way his hands clenched at his sides. "You do not know me," he said. "You do not know what I have done, what I am capable of. I have been alone so long that I have forgotten how to be gentle. I have forgotten how to be good." "Then teach yourself again," Eleanor said, and she reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his beard, feeling the heat of his skin beneath her palm. "Teach us both." He caught her wrist, not roughly, but firmly, his grip a warning and a plea all at once. "I cannot control myself around you," he said, and his voice had gone rough, stripped of all pretense. "From the moment you fell through my door, something in me has been fighting to break free. Something that wants things I have no right to want." "What things?" Eleanor asked, though she already knew the answer, could feel it in the electricity that crackled between them, in the way her heart was racing against her ribs like a wild thing seeking escape. Caleb closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, the careful distance he had maintained was gone, replaced by something raw and hungry and achingly vulnerable. "I want to hold you," he said. "I want to wake up with you beside me. I want to tell you every secret I have ever kept and hear every secret you have kept from the world. I want to build a life with you in this cabin, in these mountains, far from everything that ever hurt either of us. I want you, Eleanor, in every way a man can want a woman, and it terrifies me, because I know I do not deserve it." Eleanor felt tears burning in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming recognition of her own loneliness reflected back at her. From the sudden understanding that she had been waiting her whole life for someone to see her the way this mountain man was seeing her now. "How do you know what you deserve?" she asked softly, "when you have spent 7 years punishing yourself for sins you will not even name?" Caleb flinched as if she had struck him, and she watched the walls he had built begin to crumble. "My wife," he said, and the words seemed to cost him everything. "My daughter. There was a fire. I was not home. I should have been home. But I was at the university, buried in books that meant nothing, and they died alone, and afraid, and calling for me." The grief in his voice was old but still sharp, a wound that had never fully healed. Eleanor felt her heart break for him, for the man who had fled into the wilderness to escape a guilt that followed him like a shadow. "You did not kill them," she said gently. "The fire killed them, and I think they would not want you to spend the rest of your life dying alongside them." Caleb looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw the moment something shifted in him. The moment he allowed himself to consider the possibility of forgive. "Ines, I am afraid," he admitted. "I am afraid that if I let myself love you, I will lose you too. I am afraid that happiness is something I am no longer allowed to have." Eleanor stepped closer, eliminating the last of the distance between them, and pressed her hand flat against his chest, feeling the thunder of his heart beneath her palm. "I've been afraid my whole life," she said. "Afraid to speak, afraid to want, afraid to hope. And look where it got me. Alone and frozen and dying in a mountain pass. But I did not die, Caleb. I found you, and I think maybe that means something. I think maybe we were both lost, and we were both meant to find each other." For a long moment, Caleb did not move. He stood there like a man on the edge of a cliff, knowing that the fall might destroy him, but unable to step back to safety. And then, slowly, carefully, as if handling something infinitely precious, he raised his hands to cup her face. When he kissed her, it was not the desperate, hungry kiss Eleanor had expected. It was tender and searching, and filled with a reverence that made her feel treasured in a way she had never felt before. His lips moved against hers like a question, and she answered with everything she had, pressing closer, rising on her toes, tangling her fingers in his hair. They stood there in the firelight, two broken people finding wholeness in each other, and the world outside faded to nothing. The days that followed were unlike anything Eleanor had ever known. They talked for hours, sharing stories and secrets and dreams that had been buried so long they had almost been forgotten. Caleb read to her from his collection of books, his deep voice bringing Shakespeare and Shelley and Keats to life in the flickering firelight. Eleanor cooked meals from his stores of preserved meat and dried vegetables, and they ate together at his small table, their knees, too, hung beneath the worn wood. And at night, they slept side by side in the narrow bed, their bodies curved together like two halves of a whole. They did not rush toward physical intimacy, understanding instinctively that what was building between them was too important to be hurried. Instead, they learned each other slowly, tender touches and whispered confessions, the gradual mapping of scars both visible and hidden. Eleanor told him about her marriage, about the husband who had seen her as a possession rather than a partner, about the years she had spent shrinking herself to fit into the small box he had built for her. She told him about the relief she had felt when he died, and the guilt that had followed the relief, and the way she had finally understood that guilt was just another cage. Caleb told her about his daughter, about her laugh that had sounded like music, about the way she had loved to sit on his lap while he read to her. He told her about his wife, about the good years before they had grown distant, about the last argument they had that he could never take back. He told her about the 7 years he had spent in these mountains, punishing himself with solitude, and how empty it all seemed now that he had someone to share it with. On the 8th night, the storm finally broke. Eleanor stood at the window, watching the stars emerge from behind the retreating clouds, and felt Caleb's arms wrap around her from behind. "The passes will be clear in a day or 2, he said quietly. "You will be able to continue your journey west." Eleanor turned in his embrace, looking up at the man who had become her whole world in barely more than a week. "What if I do not want to continue?" she asked. "What if everything I was looking for is right here?" Caleb's breath caught, and she saw hope and fear warring in his gray eyes. "You would stay?" he asked. "Here, in this cabin?" "Aye, in these mountains, with me." Eleanor smiled, and it felt like the first real smile she had worn in years. "You warned me that first night," she said. "You told me you could not control yourself around me. But Caleb, you have shown me nothing but control, nothing but patience and kindness, and a love so careful it makes me want to weep. If that is who you are when you cannot control yourself, then I cannot imagine anything more wonderful than spending my life finding out who you are when you are free." Caleb made a sound that was half laugh and half sob, and he pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I love you," he said, the words muffled against her neck. "I did not think I would ever say those words again, did not think I had the right, but I love you, Eleanor. I love you." She held him as he trembled, this strong mountain man who had survived alone for so long, and she whispered her love back to him again and again, until the words lost all meaning and became simply another way of breathing. They were married in the spring, when the mountain meadows exploded with wildflowers and the streams ran clear and cold with snowmelt. A traveling preacher performed the ceremony, bemused by the couple who lived so far from civilization, but clearly so deeply in love. The years that followed were not always easy. Life in the mountains demanded strength and resilience, and there were winters that tested them both, but they faced every challenge together, their love not diminishing with time, but deepening, growing roots that reached down into the very bedrock of who they were. Eleanor never forgot how close she had come to dying in that snowstorm, and she never stopped being grateful for the light that had guided her to safety, to warmth, to home. She never stopped being grateful for the mountain man who had warned her about himself and then spent every day proving that best parts of him were stronger than the parts he feared. And Caleb never forgot that second chances were precious things, not to be wasted. He loved his wife with everything he had, every day that they were given, and he built a new life on the foundations of the old one without ever forgetting those he had lost. Because that was the truth Eleanor had taught him, the truth that had saved them both. Love was not about deserving or earning. It was about choosing every day to be brave enough to let someone in. And they had chosen each other in a frozen cabin in the middle of nowhere. Two lost souls had found their way home.